Everyone watched in horror as Connor Hayes, Manhattan's youngest billionaire, poured a glass of vintage wine down the elegant black woman's designer dress at his own victory party. The crowd gasped. Whispers rippled through the room. She had politely rejected his drunken advances, and he had no idea who she really was or what she could do. What happened the next morning in that boardroom would shatter his world and change both their lives forever. Before we start, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video and comment where you are watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue. The November wind whipped against the windows of the Meridian Towers penthouse suite, 43 stories above the glittering chaos of Manhattan. Inside, 28-year-old Connor Hayes stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his emerald green silk tie for the third time. His reflection showed a man carved from ambition, sharp cheekbones, storm gray eyes that held the intensity of someone who'd clawed his way from a Detroit trailer park to Park Avenue, and dark brown hair styled with the precision of someone who understood that image was everything. "Mirror, mirror on the wall," he murmured, flashing that billion-dollar smile that had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune before his 30th birthday. "Who's about to be the richest of them all?" His reflection didn't answer, but the stack of newspapers on his marble countertop spoke volumes. "Hayes Enterprises poised for historic quantum computing deal," screamed the Wall Street Journal headline. "Young CEO ready to revolutionize tech industry," proclaimed the New York Times. Each article mentioned the same magic number, $847 million, the largest technology contract in New York State history. Connor's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his platinum cufflinks, not from nerves but from pure adrenaline. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp, he would sign the contract that would transform Hayes Enterprises from a successful startup into a tech giant. The deal with Meridian Global Solutions had taken 18 months to negotiate, but the representative had finally confirmed via email yesterday, contract approved. Looking forward to tomorrow's signing ceremony. 18 months of presentations, proposals, and sleepless nights, Connor thought, walking through his penthouse toward the living room where his assistant Kelly was arranging catered appetizers. And it all comes down to one signature tomorrow. The penthouse buzzed with pre-party energy. Servers in crisp white uniforms arranged champagne flutes on crystal trays, while a jazz quartet tuned their instruments near the grand piano. Connor had spared no expense. Le Bernardin had catered the event, Dom Perignon 2012 flowed like water, and he'd hired the same event coordinator who'd organized Mayor Adams' inaugural celebration. "Mr. Hayes," Kelly called out, her auburn hair pulled back in a professional bun as she consulted her tablet. "The guest list is confirmed at 87. Governor Hochul's representative will arrive at 8:30, and the Rothschild family sent their regrets but a lovely arrangement." Connor nodded absently, his mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's headlines. Hayes Enterprises seals billion-dollar deal. Maybe they'd finally stop calling him the startup prodigy and start using tech mogul instead. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was celebrating a deal that hadn't technically been signed yet. But when Meridian Global's representative had sent that confirmation email, Connor couldn't contain his excitement. He'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to not savor this moment. From food stamps to Forbes, he reminded himself, straightening his Armani jacket. Mom would be proud. The memory of his mother flickered through his mind, Janet Hayes, who'd worked 3 jobs to keep their Detroit trailer heated, who'd sold her wedding ring to buy him his first computer when he was 12. She died of cancer his junior year at MIT, never seeing him graduate, never witnessing his first million. But she'd believed in him when no one else would. "Sir." Kelly's voice pulled him back to the present. "The first guests are arriving." Connor checked his Patek Philippe watch. 7:47 p.m. Perfect timing. Across town in the Flatiron District, Kimberly Romero stood before her hotel room mirror, applying the final touches to her makeup with the precision of someone who understood that every detail mattered in a world that judged her twice as harshly. At 26, she possessed the kind of striking beauty that turned heads, rich mahogany skin that seemed to glow from within, expressive dark brown eyes framed by naturally long lashes, and a smile that could disarm the most hardened executive. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased the graceful curve of her neck. She'd chosen her outfit with calculated care, a midnight blue Oscar de la Renta cocktail dress that hugged her curves without being provocative, paired with modest Louboutin heels and her grandmother's pearl necklace. Professional yet feminine, confident yet approachable, exactly the image she needed to project tonight. But Kimberly wasn't what she appeared to be. The modeling portfolio scattered across her hotel bed was merely her cover story. Her real credentials lay in the leather briefcase beside it: Columbia Business School MBA, Goldman Sachs investment banking experience, and most importantly, her business card that read Senior Vice President, Strategic Partnerships, Meridian Global Solutions. For the past 18 months, she'd been the anonymous voice on conference calls with Hayes Enterprises, the careful architect behind every contract negotiation. Connor Hayes had no idea that A. Winters from his email correspondence was a young black woman who'd graduated summa cum laude and could discuss quantum computing algorithms as easily as quarterly profit margins. Kimberly picked up her phone and scrolled through the email thread with Hayes' team. Tomorrow's signing ceremony represented more than just another contract. It was her pathway to senior partner at Meridian Global, the promotion she'd been working toward since joining the firm 3 years ago. At 26, she'd be the youngest senior partner in the company's history, and certainly the first black woman to hold the position. Don't think about the milestone, she reminded herself, applying a final coat of burgundy lipstick. Think about the work. The work speaks for itself. But tonight wasn't about work. Tonight was reconnaissance. Meridian Global CEO, Robert Sterling, had insisted she attend Hayes' premature victory party. Know your clients, he told her during their morning briefing. Hayes is young, ambitious, possibly reckless. See what kind of man we're really dealing with before we commit $847 million to his vision. The invitation had come through modeling industry connections. Kimberly had done some legitimate runway work during business school to pay expenses, and her agency still sent her occasional opportunities. When Hayes Enterprises requested elegant, sophisticated models for their corporate party, her agent had recommended her. The irony was delicious. She'd be evaluating her own client while he had no idea who she really was. Kimberly checked her reflection one final time, practicing the smile she'd used tonight, mysterious enough to maintain intrigue, warm enough to encourage conversation. She'd perfected this balance during her Goldman Sachs days, where being underestimated was often an advantage. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Jasmine. "Break a leg tonight, girl. Though technically you're not supposed to be there for the reason they think." Kimberly smiled genuinely for the first time all evening. Jasmine was the only person who knew about tonight's dual mission. They'd been roommates at Columbia, where Jasmine had watched Kimberly navigate the challenges of being one of only 12 black students in their MBA program, one of even fewer black women. "Trust the process," Kimberly typed back, using their shared motto from business school. "Tomorrow changes everything." She slipped her phone into her Chanel clutch alongside her lip gloss and the business card she wouldn't be using tonight. The modeling portfolio stayed on the bed. She'd memorized her cover story perfectly. As she walked toward the hotel elevator, Kimberly's mind wandered to tomorrow's meeting. She'd spent weeks preparing for the signing ceremony, reviewing every clause, anticipating every possible question Connor Hayes might ask. She knew his company's financial projections better than he did, understood the quantum computing market better than most of his engineers. What she didn't know was what kind of man he really was behind the Forbes covers and carefully crafted public image. Time to find out, she thought as the elevator descended toward the lobby where her Uber waited. The November night air bit through her coat as she stepped outside, but Kimberly felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. Tomorrow would reshape both their careers, but tonight would reveal whether Connor Hayes deserved the opportunity she was about to give him. Neither of them could have imagined that in less than 2 hours, one impulsive moment would threaten to destroy everything they'd both worked so hard to achieve. The party had reached that perfect crescendo where champagne loosened tongues and laughter echoed off the marble walls. Connor Hayes moved through his guests like a king surveying his kingdom, his emerald tie slightly askew, his storm-gray eyes bright with Dom Perignon and anticipation. The jazz quartet played softly in the background, while Manhattan's elite mingled beneath crystal chandeliers that cast dancing shadows across the room. Connor. Governor Hochul's chief of staff, Patricia Chun, raised her champagne flute as he approached. Tomorrow's the big day. How does it feel to be making history? Like destiny finally catching up, Connor replied, his words carrying the slight slur of someone 3 glasses past careful. 18 months of negotiations, and tomorrow morning I sign the deal that changes everything. He gestured expansively toward the windows where Manhattan glittered below them. See that city? Tomorrow, Hayes Enterprises becomes the biggest tech company in New York State. $847 million. Not bad for a kid from Detroit, right? The small crowd around him murmured appreciative sounds, but Connor barely heard them. The champagne had unlocked something reckless in his chest, an intoxicating mixture of vindication and entitlement. He'd proven everyone wrong, every investor who doubted him, every competitor who dismissed him as too young, too hungry, too desperate. I deserve this, he thought, scanning the room with proprietary satisfaction. I deserve everything. That's when he saw her. She stood near the windows, silhouetted against the city lights, and Connor's breath caught in his throat. The woman was stunning. Her midnight blue dress hugged curves that belonged in classical art. Her mahogany skin seemed to absorb and reflect the chandelier lights simultaneously, and there was something about her posture, the way she held her champagne flute, that suggested both elegance and strength. "Excuse me," Connor murmured to Patricia, already moving toward this vision who'd somehow materialized in his penthouse. Kimberly had been observing the party with the trained eye of someone conducting research. She'd watched Connor work the room for the past hour, noting how he commanded attention, how other guests gravitated toward his energy. He was undeniably charismatic. She could see why investors trusted him with their money, why employees followed his vision. But she'd also noticed the subtle signs of someone drinking too much, the slightly too loud laughter, the way he gestured more expansively with each passing conversation, the flush creeping up his neck above his collar. Classic type A personality, she observed clinically. High achiever, probably doesn't know his own limits. She'd been nursing the same glass of champagne all evening, maintaining her cover while gathering intelligence. The modeling story had worked perfectly. Other guests assumed she was decorative rather than substantive, allowing her to overhear conversations about Hayes Enterprises' financial projections, expansion plans, and tomorrow's signing ceremony. "I don't think we've been introduced." Kimberly turned to find Connor Hayes himself approaching, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken despite her professional detachment. Up close, he was even more striking than his magazine photos suggested. There was something raw and magnetic about him, an energy that demanded attention. "I'm Connor," he said, extending his hand with a smile that had probably launched 1,000 business deals. "Welcome to my home." "Kimberly," she replied, accepting his handshake with practiced composure. His palm was warm, slightly damp with nervous energy. "Thank you for having me. Beautiful party." "Not as beautiful as you," Connor said, and Kimberly's internal alarm bells began chiming. The line was delivered with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted, when he wanted it. "That's very kind," she replied diplomatically, withdrawing her hand and taking a small step back. "Professional distance. Always maintain professional distance." But Connor stepped closer, emboldened by champagne and the heady rush of impending success. "You know, I've been watching you all evening. There's something different about you. Most of the women here tonight." He gestured dismissively toward the rest of the party. "They're interested in what I have. But you seem interested in who I am." Kimberly blinked, startled by his presumption. "Actually, Let me guess," Connor interrupted, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a seductive murmur. "You're a model, right? I can always tell. You have that quality, like you're used to being looked at, being desired." The words hit Kimberly like ice water. She could feel her professional mask slipping, replaced by something sharper. I'm here as a guest, just like everyone else. Come on, Connor laughed, swirling his champagne. Don't be modest. A woman who looks like you? In a dress like that? You know exactly what effect you have on men. Kimberly's jaw tightened. She'd heard variations of this conversation too many times. In business school, at Goldman Sachs, in every professional environment where her appearance preceded her credentials. I think you're making some assumptions. The only assumption I'm making, Connor said, stepping even closer until she could smell the champagne on his breath, is that you're as smart as you are beautiful. Smart enough to recognize an opportunity when you see one. His hand moved to her waist, and Kimberly's composure finally cracked. Remove your hand, she said quietly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to boardroom negotiations. Connor's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. Relax, beautiful. I'm just being friendly. Do you know who I am? Tomorrow morning, I'm signing the biggest tech deal in New York State history. $847 million. By this time tomorrow night, Hayes Enterprises will be worth over $2 billion. Congratulations, Kimberly said icily, but that doesn't give you the right to. The right. Connor's laugh was harsh now, his charm curdling into something uglier. Sweetheart, when you're worth what I'm worth, when you've achieved what I've achieved, you realize that some rules are more flexible. The conversation around them had begun to quiet, other guests sensing the tension crackling between them. Kimberly was acutely aware of eyes turning in their direction, phones potentially recording, her carefully maintained cover threatening to explode. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. I'm not interested in whatever you're offering. Connor's storm-gray eyes darkened, and Kimberly saw something dangerous flicker across his features. The entitled little boy who'd never been told no, now faced with rejection at his moment of triumph. Misunderstanding, he repeated, his voice rising slightly. The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you're too good for this opportunity. Do you know how many women would kill to be in your position right now? I'm sure they would, Kimberly replied evenly. I'm not one of them. The words hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Connor's face flushed deeper, whether from champagne or embarrassment, she couldn't tell. But she could see the exact moment his fragile ego cracked. You know what? He said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. You're right. You're not good enough for this opportunity. You're just another pretty face trying to social climb at my party. Kimberly felt every pair of eyes in the room turn toward them, felt the weight of assumptions and judgments settling on her shoulders like familiar, unwelcome friends. The successful black woman reduced to a social climber. The accomplished executive dismissed as a pretty face. I think I should leave, she said quietly, turning toward the door. Yeah, you should, Connor called after her, his voice carrying the ugly edge of someone whose pride had been wounded. But before you go, let me give you something to remember this evening by. Kimberly turned back just in time to see Connor raise his champagne flute. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their eyes met across the marble expanse of his penthouse. She saw the exact instant he made his decision, saw the moment entitled privilege chose humiliation over grace. The crystal glass left his hand in a perfect arc. Time moved like honey as Kimberly watched the Dom Perignon fly toward her, the golden liquid catching the chandelier light like liquid fire. She could have stepped aside, her reflexes were quick enough, but something kept her frozen in place. Perhaps it was shock, perhaps it was the desire to see exactly how far Connor Hayes would go. The champagne hit her midnight blue dress with a splash that echoed through the silent room, the cold liquid soaking through the expensive fabric and dripping onto her Louboutin heels. Golden drops clung to her pearls, ran down her arms, stained the dress she'd chosen so carefully for tonight's reconnaissance. But it wasn't the champagne that burned, it was the humiliation, the public degradation, the knowledge that everyone in this room would remember her not as an accomplished professional, but as the woman Connor Hayes had drenched in wine. The crystal flute shattered against the marble floor with a sound like breaking dreams. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The jazz quartet had stopped playing. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the servers stood frozen with their trays of canapés and champagne. Connor stood there, his hand still extended from the throw, his face cycling through emotions, satisfaction, shock, and then, as the silence stretched, something that might have been regret. Kimberly looked down at her ruined dress, at the champagne pooling around her feet, at the shattered crystal glinting like accusations in the chandelier light. When she raised her eyes to meet Connor's, her expression was utterly composed. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "for showing me exactly who you are." She walked toward the elevator with her head high, her heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of someone who had never learned to retreat. Behind her, she could hear the whispered conversation starting, the sound of phones capturing the aftermath, the rustle of gossip being born. Connor watched her go, the champagne still fizzing in his blood, his hands still tingling from the weight of the crystal he'd thrown. Part of him wanted to call after her, to apologize, to explain that he wasn't usually like this. But a larger part, the part drunk on success and entitlement, felt justified. She'd embarrassed him at his own party, rejected him on the night of his greatest triumph. She'd gotten what she deserved. "Tomorrow I'll be a billionaire," he told himself as the elevator doors closed behind her. "Tomorrow, none of this will matter." The elevator descended in silence, carrying Kimberly away from the party and toward a reckoning that Connor Hayes couldn't possibly imagine. In her Chanel clutch, her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant, final contract review scheduled for 8 a.m. Ready to make history. Kimberly looked at her reflection in the elevator's polished steel walls, champagne-stained, humiliated, but far from defeated. Tomorrow morning, Connor Hayes would discover that some people you simply cannot afford to disrespect. The doors opened onto the lobby, and Kimberly Romero walked into the November night, already planning how she would use the next 10 hours to reshape both their futures. Neither of them realized that the shattered crystal on Connor's marble floor had broken more than just glass. It had shattered the carefully laid plans of two ambitious people whose destinies were now inextricably, dangerously intertwined. The first thing Connor felt was the drilling sensation behind his temples, followed immediately by the acrid taste of regret coating his tongue like old champagne. Sunlight streamed mercilessly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his bedroom, illuminating the disaster zone that had been last night's celebration. He rolled over in his king-sized bed, his platinum watch catching the morning light as he squinted at the time. 6:47. The signing ceremony was in exactly 13 hours and 23 minutes, the most important day of his professional life, and he felt like he'd been hit by a freight train carrying Dom Perignon. Water. Coffee. Shower. In that order. Connor hauled himself upright, his charcoal-gray pajama pants wrinkled from restless sleep. The penthouse was eerily quiet except for the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 60 floors below. His housekeeper wouldn't arrive until 9, leaving him alone with the aftermath of his triumph party. Walking toward the kitchen, he stepped over the evidence of last night's excess: empty champagne bottles, forgotten cocktail napkins, a woman's earring that definitely didn't belong to anyone he remembered talking to. But it was the sight of the living room that made him pause. Shattered crystal glittered across the marble floor near the windows, catching the morning light like accusations. The remnants of his champagne flute lay scattered in a perfect circle, surrounded by dark stains where expensive wine had splashed and dried. The woman in the blue dress. The memory hit him like a physical blow, her face when the champagne struck her, the way she'd stood there dripping wet and utterly composed, the deadly quiet of her voice when she'd thanked him for showing his true character. For a moment, Connor felt something uncomfortably close to shame crawling up his throat. Then his phone buzzed with a text from his publicist. Wall Street Journal wants a quote about today's signing. The biggest tech deal in New York history deserves the biggest headlines. Connor's jaw tightened as he deleted the message. By tonight, he'd be worth over $2 billion. By next week, Hayes Enterprises would be mentioned in the same breath as Apple and Google. Whatever happened last night was just a footnote in the story of his rise to the top. She was probably some wannabe influencer anyway, he told himself, stepping carefully around the broken glass. Trying to use my party for social media content. But even as he thought it, Connor knew it wasn't true. There had been something different about her, the way she'd carried herself, the authority in her voice when she'd told him to remove his hand. She hadn't been impressed by his wealth or intimidated by his power, and that realization twisted something uncomfortable in his chest. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked like a casualty of war, bloodshot gray eyes, tousled dark hair, and a day's worth of stubble that did nothing to hide the fact that he looked exactly like what he was, a hungover billionaire who behaved badly at his own party. Get it together, Hayes, he commanded his reflection. Today changes everything. 3 miles away, Kimberly stood under the rainfall shower in her suite at the St. Regis, letting scalding water wash away the last traces of Dom Perignon from her hair. The midnight blue dress hung in the bathroom, still damp from her attempts to clean it, though she knew it was ruined beyond salvation. $800 of silk and dignity, destroyed by a spoiled man-child with too much money and too little sense. But it wasn't the dress that bothered her, it was the memory of every face in that room, watching her humiliation with a mixture of shock and barely concealed satisfaction. The successful black woman brought low, reduced to a spectacle for their entertainment. Let them watch, she thought grimly, working shampoo through her dark curls. In 4 hours, I'll own their golden boy. Her phone, charging on the marble bathroom counter, buzzed with a call from her assistant. Kimberly stepped out of the shower, wrapping herself in the hotel's plush white robe before answering. Tell me you have good news, Rachel, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. The contracts are ready for final review. Rachel's voice was crisp and efficient through the speaker. Legal finished the amendments at 5 this morning. Everything's exactly as you specified. Full acquisition terms, board restructuring, the works. Kimberly nodded, though Rachel couldn't see her. And our research on Hayes. Complete psychological profile attached to your email. The man's a classic narcissist with abandonment issues stemming from childhood poverty. Brilliant at business strategy. Terrible at personal relationships. Last night's behavior fits the pattern perfectly. Childhood poverty. The detail caught Kimberly off guard. She'd assumed Connor Hayes was old money, born into privilege and entitlement. Learning that he'd clawed his way up from nothing complicated her mental picture of him, though it didn't excuse his behavior. Rachel, I want you to dig deeper into his background. Find out everything. How he built the company, who his mentors were, what drives him beyond money. Already on it. Kimberly. Rachel's voice carried a note of concern. Are you sure you want to go through with this? After what happened last night, you could destroy him completely. Why give him a chance to recover? Kimberly looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, her mahogany skin still flushed from a hot shower, her dark eyes bright with determination. Last night, Connor Hayes had tried to reduce her to an object, a trophy to be claimed by wealth and power. Today, she would show him what real power looked like. Because destroying him would be too easy, she said finally. I want him to understand exactly what he lost when he chose humiliation over respect. After ending the call, Kimberly stood at the window of her suite, looking out over Central Park as Manhattan awakened below. Joggers traced paths between bare November trees, steam rose from coffee carts, and somewhere in this city, Connor Hayes was preparing for what he believed would be the greatest day of his life. He has no idea what's coming. Connor's hangover had receded to a manageable throb by the time his driver deposited him outside the 40-story glass tower that housed Hayes Enterprises. He'd showered, shaved, and dressed in his lucky navy suit, the same one he'd worn to his first board meeting 5 years ago, when he'd been nothing but hunger and ambition wrapped in borrowed confidence. The lobby buzzed with Saturday morning energy despite the weekend, his employees understanding that today marked a turning point for the company. Connor moved through the space like he owned it, which technically he did, nodding to the security guards who'd watched him build this empire from nothing. "Morning, Mr. Hayes," called Janet, his executive assistant, as he stepped off the elevator on the 40th floor. "The conference room is ready for final prep. Your legal team wants to review the signing order one more time." "Tell them 5 minutes," Connor replied, heading toward his corner office. "I need to make a call first." The office was his sanctuary, a temple to ambition decorated with awards, framed magazine covers featuring his face, and a wall of windows overlooking New York Harbor. Connor settled behind his mahogany desk and dialed his mentor's number, needing to hear a familiar voice before the chaos began. "Connor." Harold Pemberton's gravelly voice filled the speaker. "Big day, son. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to make history," Connor replied, and felt his confidence returning as he said the words. Harold had been his first investor, the man who'd seen potential in a hungry kid from Detroit when everyone else saw risk. "You've earned this," Harold said firmly. 5 years ago, you walked into my office with nothing but a PowerPoint and a dream. Today, you're signing the biggest tech deal in state history. Your parents would be proud." Connor's throat tightened at the mention of his parents. They died in a car accident when he was 15, leaving him to navigate the foster system before earning a scholarship to MIT. Every success since then had been motivated by their memory, by the promise he'd made at their graveside to become someone who mattered. "Thanks, Harold. That means everything coming from you." "Just remember," Harold's voice carried a note of warning, "success is about more than money. It's about the kind of man you become in the process. Don't let the power go to your head." The words hit uncomfortably close to home, and Connor found himself thinking about the woman in the blue dress, about the moment he'd chosen cruelty over grace. But before he could respond, Janet knocked on his door. "Mr. Hayes? The Meridian Group's representatives just arrived. They're requesting an immediate pre-meeting." Connor's pulse quickened. Meridian Group was the investment consortium he'd been courting for 18 months, the deep-pocketed investors who would fund his expansion into artificial intelligence and quantum computing. Today's signing would make Hayes Enterprises their exclusive technology partner, worth $847 million in immediate funding with billions more to follow. "Harold, I have to go. The future is calling." "Make good choices, son," Harold replied. "And congratulations." Connor straightened his tie and headed toward the conference room, his mind already shifting into negotiation mode. The hangover was gone, the memories of last night's mistakes pushed aside by the intoxicating proximity of victory. The conference room was a masterpiece of intimidation, a gleaming table surrounded by leather chairs, with windows offering panoramic views of Manhattan. His legal team was already assembled, 4 of the city's best corporate attorneys armed with contracts and confidence. "Status report," Connor commanded, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Everything's in order," replied his lead counsel, Patricia Wong. "The contracts are ironclad, the terms favor our expansion goals, and Meridian's legal team has signed off on all preliminary documentation. This is purely ceremonial at this point." Connor nodded, feeling the familiar rush of a deal coming together. "And their representatives?" "Arriving any moment," Patricia checked her watch. "They're bringing a small team, just the decision-makers and their lead negotiator." As if summoned by her words, the conference room door opened and Janet appeared. "Mr. Hayes, the Meridian Group is here." Connor stood, his most confident smile sliding into place as he prepared to greet the people who would transform his company from successful startup to industry titan. He'd spent months researching Meridian's executives, memorizing their backgrounds and preferences, crafting the perfect approach for each personality. But nothing had prepared him for what walked through that door. Kimberly entered the conference room like she owned it, dressed in a charcoal gray power suit that transformed her from last night's humiliated party guest into something far more dangerous, a woman who clearly belonged in rooms where 8-figure deals were negotiated. Behind her came 2 men in matching navy suits, Meridian's legal team, Connor realized dimly, but he couldn't focus on them. His entire world had narrowed to the woman whose dress he'd ruined with champagne 12 hours ago, who now stood in his boardroom holding a leather portfolio that probably contained his company's future. For a moment that lasted forever, their eyes met across the conference table. Connor felt every drop of blood drain from his face as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. She's not a model. She's not a social climber. She's not some wannabe influencer. She's my $847 million decision-maker. Kimberly's expression revealed nothing, not recognition, not anger, not satisfaction. Just the cool professionalism of someone conducting business on a Saturday morning. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Mr. Hayes," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand across the table. "I'm Kimberly Romero, Lead Investment Director for Meridian Group. I believe we met briefly last night." Connor stared at her outstretched hand, his mind reeling as he tried to process the cosmic joke the universe had just played on him. The woman he'd humiliated, whose dignity he tried to destroy with champagne and cruel words, now held the power to destroy everything he'd built. His hand moved automatically to shake hers, though his palm was suddenly slick with perspiration. MS. Winters. Yes. Last night was enlightening. Kimberly finished smoothly, her grip firm and professional. "Shall we begin?" As she took her seat across from him, Connor felt the walls of his perfectly planned future beginning to crumble. The biggest deal in his company's history, the validation he'd worked 5 years to achieve, the proof that a kid from Detroit could conquer Manhattan, all of it now rested in the hands of a woman who had every reason to destroy him. And from the calm, calculating look in her dark eyes, Connor was beginning to suspect that destruction was exactly what she had in mind. The conference room fell silent except for the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic 60 floors below, while two ambitious people stared at each other across a table laden with contracts that would either build an empire or burn it to the ground. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Connor's hand remained frozen in Kimberly's grip, his mind racing through calculations that all led to the same devastating conclusion. His empire balanced on the fingertips of a woman he drenched in Dom Perignon. "Perhaps we should start with introductions," Kimberly said, finally releasing his hand and settling into her chair with the fluid grace of someone comfortable wielding power. "Though I suspect Mr. Hayes has already done his research on Meridian Group." "Think, Connor. Think like the businessman you are, not the idiot you were last night." Connor forced his professional mask into place, though sweat gathered at his collar despite the conference room's Arctic air conditioning. "Of course. Ms. Winters, I've been looking forward to this meeting for months." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. He'd expected to meet Meridian's mysterious lead negotiator today, but their personnel files had been frustratingly vague. Now he understood why. Kimberly Romero wasn't just any investment director. She was the Kimberly Romero, the woman who'd turned 3 failing companies into billion-dollar acquisitions, who'd earned her MBA from Wharton at 24 and her reputation for ruthless precision by 30. "Excellent," Kimberly replied, opening her leather portfolio with deliberate precision. "Then you'll understand why Meridian Group takes character assessment as seriously as financial projections." The words hit Connor like ice water. Patricia Wong, his lead counsel, shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearly sensing undercurrents she couldn't identify. The 2 Meridian lawyers flanking Kimberly remained stone-faced, their attention fixed on tablets displaying what Connor could only assume were the contracts that would either save or sink his company. Character assessment. Connor kept his voice level, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I wasn't aware that was part of your evaluation process." Kimberly's smile could have cut glass. "Oh, Mr. Hayes, character is everything in long-term partnerships. How a potential partner treats others when they believe no one important is watching tells us far more than quarterly projections ever could. She's going to destroy me. She's going to burn everything down because I was a drunken ass." But even as panic clawed at his throat, Connor's survival instincts kicked in. He hadn't built Hayes Enterprises by crumbling under pressure. He'd learned to fight dirty in Detroit's Foster Homes, refined that skill in MIT's cutthroat business program, and perfected it in Manhattan's venture capital wars. I appreciate Meridian's thoroughness, Connor replied, leaning back in his chair with manufactured confidence. Though I hope you'll evaluate Hayes Enterprises based on our proven track record rather than isolated incidents. Isolated incidents, Kimberly repeated, tasting the words like expensive wine. That's an interesting way to describe deliberately humiliating a woman at a public gathering. Patricia's pen stopped moving across her legal pad. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees as Connor's legal team realized they were witnessing something far more personal than standard contract negotiations. Perhaps, Connor said carefully, we should focus on the business relationship that brought us here today. Oh, but Mr. Hayes, Kimberly's voice carried deadly sweetness, that's exactly what we're doing. You see, Meridian Group doesn't just invest money, we invest trust. $847 million requires absolute confidence that our partners share our values. She pulled a tablet from her portfolio, her manicured fingers swiping across the screen with practiced efficiency. Your company's technological innovations are impressive. Revolutionary, even. But technology without integrity is just expensive machinery. Connor watched her navigate through what appeared to be a comprehensive dossier on Hayes Enterprises, financial projections, market analysis, competitive positioning. Everything he'd worked 5 years to build, reduced to data points on a screen controlled by the woman whose dignity he tried to destroy with champagne. Ms. Winters, Patricia interjected, her lawyer instincts finally overriding her confusion. While we appreciate Meridian's holistic approach, perhaps we could review the specific terms of the partnership agreement? Kimberly's attention shifted to Patricia with laser focus. Certainly. Though I should mention that Meridian has made some last-minute adjustments to our original proposal. Last-minute adjustments. The phrase hit Connor like a physical blow. In his experience, last-minute adjustments usually meant one thing: deal killers wrapped in legal language. What kind of adjustments? Connor asked, his voice steady despite the fear crawling up his spine. Kimberly smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Nothing dramatic. Just some additional oversight provisions to ensure our investment remains protected. She slid a thick contract across the mahogany table, the papers whisper-soft against the polished wood. Connor's eyes immediately went to the highlighted sections, and what he saw there made his blood turn to ice. Board restructuring. Meridian Group reserves the right to install oversight directors. All major decisions require Meridian approval. CEO performance reviews subject to investor evaluation. These terms, Connor said slowly, are completely different from what we negotiated. Business environments change rapidly, Mr. Hayes. Surely someone of your intelligence understands that adaptability is crucial for success. The words were professional, but Connor heard the subtext clearly. You humiliated me, so now I'm going to humiliate you. Perhaps we need a brief recess, Patricia suggested, recognizing that the meeting had veered into dangerous territory. To review these new terms privately. I'm afraid that won't be possible, one of Meridian's lawyers spoke for the first time, his voice flat and efficient. Ms. Winters has another commitment this afternoon. This proposal expires at noon. Connor's eyes snapped to the wall clock. Just few minutes to make a decision that would determine whether he remained master of his own company or became a highly paid employee of Meridian Group. That's not much time to evaluate such significant changes, Connor said. Time management is another crucial business skill, Kimberly replied. Though I suppose some people are better at it than others. The room fell silent except for the whispered consultation between Patricia and the rest of Connor's legal team. Connor stared at the contract, his mind racing through options that all seemed to lead to the same conclusion. Kimberly Romero held every card, and she was playing for keeps. But as he watched her across the table, the way her dark eyes never wavered from his face, the controlled precision of her movements, the quiet authority that filled the room like expensive perfume, Connor began to see something else beneath her professional veneer. Pain. Carefully hidden, but unmistakably there. She's not just angry, he realized. She's hurt. The recognition hit him like lightning. This wasn't just about business or even revenge. It was about a successful woman who'd been reduced to a spectacle, whose professionalism had been answered with public humiliation. Connor had taken something from her that couldn't be returned, her dignity in front of a room full of witnesses. "Ms. Winters," Connor said quietly, his voice cutting through his lawyer's whispered debate. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" Kimberly's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'm not sure that's appropriate, Mr. Hayes. This is a business negotiation, not a personal conversation. Please." The word came out rougher than he intended. 5 minutes. For a long moment, Kimberly studied his face as if trying to read his intentions. Finally, she nodded to her legal team. "Gentlemen, would you mind giving us a moment? Perhaps you could review the technical specifications with Mr. Hayes's team." The exodus was swift but reluctant, lawyers on both sides clearly uncomfortable leaving their principals alone together. When the conference room door clicked shut, Connor found himself facing the woman whose life he depended, with nothing between them but mahogany and $800 million worth of consequences. "You have 4 minutes, Kimberly said, her voice still professionally cool but carrying an undertone of curiosity. Connor stood and walked to the windows, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared out at Manhattan's concrete and steel landscape. From 40 floors up, the city looked manageable, controllable, nothing like the chaos he felt inside. "I remember the first time I stood in this office," he said without turning around. 3 years ago, when Hayes Enterprises was just me and 2 programmers working 18-hour days. I looked out at this city and promised myself I'd never be powerless again. Mr. Hayes. Connor. Please. He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd walked into his conference room, he let his guard drop completely. "Last night, I was drunk on more than champagne. I was drunk on success I hadn't even achieved yet, on the feeling that I'd finally made it." Kimberly's expression remained neutral, but he caught something flickering in her dark eyes, not forgiveness, but attention. "That doesn't excuse what I did to you," Connor continued. "Nothing excuses it. I saw a beautiful woman and assumed she was there for my entertainment. I made you an object instead of seeing you as a person, and when you rejected me, I lashed out like a spoiled child." "Yes," Kimberly said simply. "You did." The blunt acknowledgement hit harder than any accusation could have. Connor felt something crack inside his chest, not his pride, but something deeper and more necessary. "I want to make this right," he said. "By accepting my contract terms? By understanding what I took from you." Connor moved closer to the table, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You're brilliant, successful, powerful, everything I thought I wanted to be. But last night, I tried to reduce you to nothing more than a conquest. I tried to make you small so I could feel big." Kimberly leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled as she studied his face. "And now I realize that everything I thought made me powerful, money, success, this building, means nothing if I use it to hurt people who don't deserve it." Pretty words, Connor. His name on her lips sent an unexpected jolt through him. But words are easy. Actions matter. Connor nodded, moving back to his seat across from her. "Then let me ask you something, and I want an honest answer. If I accept these contract terms, will it make you feel better about what happened last night?" The question caught Kimberly off guard. She'd been prepared for begging, for anger, for desperate attempts at manipulation. She hadn't expected him to ask about her feelings. "This isn't about my feelings," she said carefully. "This is business." "No, it's not." Connor's gray eyes held hers steadily. "This is about a woman who worked her ass off to earn respect in a world that doesn't give it freely, only to have some privileged drunk try to strip it away with a glass of champagne." For the first time since entering the conference room, Kimberly felt her professional mask slip. She saw something in Connor's expression that she hadn't expected, genuine remorse mixed with something that looked disturbingly like admiration. "What do you want me to say?" she asked, her voice softer than before. I want you to tell me what it would take for you to believe that last night was the worst version of me, not the real one. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. Outside, Manhattan hummed with Saturday morning energy, but inside the conference room, two people stared at each other across a divide measured in more than just mahogany and money. I don't know, Kimberly admitted finally. Trust isn't something you rebuild in a conversation. But it's something you can choose to try rebuilding, Connor said. If you think the person is worth the risk. Kimberly looked down at the contract between them, at the clauses designed to strip Connor of the autonomy he'd fought 5 years to achieve. The revenge would be sweet, professionally justified, and completely legal. She could walk away today knowing she'd made him pay for his arrogance. But as she looked back up at his face, at the genuine regret in his eyes, the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide, she found herself remembering something her mentor had told her years ago. The measure of power isn't how thoroughly you can destroy someone who wronged you. It's having the strength to choose mercy when destruction would be easier. The contract terms remain as written, she said finally. Connor's face fell, but he nodded acceptance. I understand. But, Kimberly continued, I'm willing to add a performance clause. Prove that last night was an aberration, not a pattern, and we can renegotiate the oversight provisions in 6 months. Connor blinked, clearly not expecting any concession. What kind of proof? Kimberly smiled for the first time since entering the room, and this time it reached her eyes. Surprise me. The conference room door opened, and both legal teams filed back in, ready to finalize whatever decision their clients had reached. But as Connor and Kimberly looked at each other across the table, both knew that something had shifted in those stolen minutes alone. The contracts would be signed. The deal would be done. But what had started as a business negotiation tinged with personal revenge had transformed into something neither of them quite understood yet. The first tentative step toward trust between two people who had every reason to remain enemies. Connor picked up his pen, his hand steady despite everything that had just changed. Where do I sign? The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and vendor hot dogs as Connor walked beside Kimberly down the tree-lined pathway. After 3 hours of contract negotiations, legal signatures, and tense handshakes, she'd surprised him by suggesting they continue their conversation outside the sterile confines of corporate Manhattan. I needed air, she'd said simply, and something in her voice made Connor cancel his afternoon meetings without hesitation. Now, watching her navigate the weekend crowd with the same controlled grace she displayed in the boardroom, Connor found himself seeing details he'd missed the night before. The way she unconsciously adjusted her burgundy wool coat when strangers stared too long. How her fingers worried the strap of her leather handbag when families passed by, their children's laughter echoing off the bare branches overhead. You know, Kimberly said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them, I almost didn't take the meridian position. Connor glanced at her profile, noting the way golden sunlight caught the angles of her face. Why not? From what I've read, you were perfect for it. Perfect on paper, maybe. Kimberly paused beside a bench facing the fountain, where the water caught the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. But being perfect on paper and being accepted in the room are two very different things. They settled onto the wooden slats, close enough that Connor caught the subtle scent of her perfume, something warm and sophisticated that seemed to capture her essence perfectly. Around them, Central Park hummed with Saturday energy, joggers in bright athletic wear, couples sharing cotton candy, street musicians filling the air with saxophone melodies. Tell me about it, Connor said, and something in his tone made Kimberly look at him more carefully. You really want to know? I'm starting to realize there's a lot I don't know about you. Connor turned to face her fully. Last night, I saw a beautiful woman at a party and made assumptions. Today, I'm sitting with one of the most successful investment directors on the East Coast. I'd like to understand how we got from there to here. Kimberly was quiet for a long moment, watching a young girl feed pigeons near the fountain while her parents looked on with indulgent smiles. I grew up in Oakland, she said finally. My mother was a high school English teacher. My father drove city buses. Good people, hard-working, but they never had enough. Connor nodded, recognizing the familiar weight of economic struggle in her voice. I was the kid who always had her nose in books, Kimberly continued, a small smile playing at her lips. While other girls were talking about boys or clothes, I was reading Forbes and Harvard Business Review at the public library. My mother used to joke that I came out of the womb wearing a tiny business suit. What changed your mind about wanting business success? Kimberly's expression darkened slightly. Nothing changed my mind. But I learned early that wanting something and being allowed to have it are completely different things. A jogger passed by, his running shoes slapping rhythmically against the asphalt pathway. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played a haunting rendition of Autumn Leaves, the melody weaving through the afternoon air like smoke. My senior year of high school, Kimberly said, her voice taking on the careful neutrality she used when discussing painful memories, I applied for a scholarship to Stanford. Full ride, merit-based, everything I'd worked 4 years to achieve. Did you get it? I got it. And then I almost lost it 3 weeks later. Kimberly's hands tightened on her handbag strap. The scholarship committee received an anonymous complaint suggesting that affirmative action had influenced their decision, that maybe they should reconsider whether I was truly the most qualified candidate. Connor felt something cold settle in his stomach. What did you do? I fought. Tooth and nail, with every document and test score and recommendation letter I could gather. I made them prove that I deserved that scholarship based on merit alone. Kimberly's voice carried quiet steel. It took 2 months and cost me my senior prom, my graduation party, and probably 10 pounds from stress. But I kept the scholarship. And Stanford was everything I dreamed of and nothing like what I'd expected. Kimberly pulled her coat tighter as a cool breeze rustled the remaining leaves overhead. I was one of 12 black women in my business program. 12, out of nearly 300 students. Connor tried to imagine walking into classes where you could count people who looked like you on 2 hands, where every mistake felt magnified and every success questioned. His own struggles at MIT had been about money and social class, but he'd never had to carry the additional weight of racial isolation. The first semester was brutal, Kimberly continued. Study groups that somehow forgot to invite me. Professors who seemed surprised when I spoke up in class. Classmates who assumed I was there because of quotas rather than qualifications. How did you handle it? Kimberly laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I outworked everyone. While they were networking at fraternity parties, I was in the library until closing. While they relied on family connections for internships, I cold-called companies until someone gave me a chance. I graduated summa cum laude with job offers from 3 Fortune 500 companies. That's incredible. It was necessary. Kimberly turned to look at him directly. You asked me earlier what it would take to rebuild trust. The truth is, Connor, I've spent my entire career learning to read people quickly and accurately. It's a survival skill when you're often the only person who looks like you in important rooms. Connor felt the weight of her words settle over him like lead. And your read on me last night? Last night, you looked at me and saw exactly what I've been fighting against my entire life. A pretty face that didn't belong in your world unless it was there for your entertainment. Kimberly's voice remained steady, but Connor caught the pain underneath. You reduced 15 years of education and achievement to a dress and an opportunity. The saxophone music swelled and faded as the musician moved to a different location. A family walked past, their daughter skipping ahead while clutching a bright red balloon. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the weight of the conversation happening on the bench beside the fountain. I want to tell you something, Connor said quietly, about why I reacted the way I did. You don't have to. I think I do. Connor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees as he stared at the ground between his feet. I grew up in Detroit. Not the nice parts you see in tourism brochures, the parts they don't show on the news because they're too depressing even for disaster coverage. Kimberly remained silent, sensing that this confession was costing him something significant. My mother was 16 when she had me. Father disappeared before I learned to walk. We lived with my grandmother until I was 8, and then... Connor's voice caught slightly. Grandma couldn't handle raising a kid anymore. Mom was struggling with addiction, in and out of treatment facilities. So I went into the system. Foster care. 7 different homes in 4 years. Connor's laugh was bitter. Some were decent. Others, let's just say I learned early that the world isn't fair, and nobody owes you anything just because you're a kid who needs help. Kimberly felt something shift in her chest as she watched Connor struggle with memories he clearly didn't share often. The arrogant billionaire from last night was gone, replaced by someone who understood what it meant to fight for every opportunity. I aged out of the system at 18 with $200, a GED, and a determination to never be powerless again. Connor finally looked up at her. MIT was my Stanford, a dream that seemed impossible until I made it happen through pure stubbornness and financial aid. How did you go from foster care to MIT? Community college first, then transfer applications until someone took a chance on me. I worked 3 jobs to cover what the scholarships didn't, slept in the library more nights than I care to count, and graduated with honors in computer engineering. Kimberly found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about the man beside her. And Hayes Enterprises? Started in my dorm room senior year with an idea for predictive analytics software. 5 years later, we're about to revolutionize how companies forecast market trends. Connor turned to face her fully. Everything I've built, every success I've achieved, has been about proving that a throwaway kid from Detroit could matter. Then why? Kimberly stopped herself, but Connor understood the unfinished question. Why did I treat you like you didn't matter? Connor was quiet for a long moment, watching pigeons compete for crumbs near their feet. Because somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that having money meant I'd earned the right to take what I wanted. That success had erased the scared kid who used to hide under foster home staircases. The honesty in his voice surprised them both. Around them, Central Park continued its Saturday afternoon rhythm, but the space between Connor and Kimberly had become something separate, more intimate than either had intended. Last night, Connor continued, when you walked into that party wearing that incredible dress, looking like you belonged in a world I'd fought to enter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. What? Intimidation. The admission seemed to cost him. You had this confidence, this natural elegance that I've never been able to fake no matter how much money I make. And instead of respecting that, instead of being impressed by it, I tried to diminish it so I could feel bigger. Kimberly studied his profile as he spoke, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. This wasn't the calculated charm of a businessman trying to save a deal. This was someone genuinely grappling with an ugly truth about himself. You know what's ironic? She said softly. What? I noticed you the moment you walked into that ballroom. Kimberly's admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Before the drinks, before the arrogance, before everything went wrong. I saw you talking to the tech entrepreneurs by the bar, and I thought you looked like someone who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. Connor's head snapped up, surprise clear in his gray eyes. You noticed me? Hard to miss. You had this energy, this passion when you talked about your company. It was. She paused, searching for the right word, attractive, in a way that had nothing to do with money or status. Then why didn't you? Because the moment you approached me, everything changed. Kimberly's voice carried the weight of disappointment. You stopped being the passionate entrepreneur and became just another wealthy man who thought his success entitled him to whatever he wanted. Connor felt something crack open in his chest, a pain that went deeper than professional embarrassment or wounded pride. He destroyed something that might have been beautiful before it ever had a chance to begin. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words carried 5 years of loneliness he'd never acknowledged. "I'm sorry for seeing you as a conquest instead of a person. I'm sorry for trying to make you small when you're clearly extraordinary. And I'm sorry for wasting what could have been." What could have been what? Connor looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength in her posture, the vulnerability she was allowing him to see despite every reason to keep her walls up. "Something real," he said quietly. "Something that mattered more than business deals or social status." The saxophone music had started again, closer now, the melody weaving around them like an invitation to honesty. Families continued to pass by, children's laughter mixing with the sound of fountain water and distant traffic. But for Connor and Kimberly, the rest of the world had faded to background noise. "Connor," Kimberly said carefully, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying that sitting here with you, learning who you really are, I'm more attracted to you than I was last night when all I could see was how you looked in that dress." Connor's voice was rough with honesty. "I'm saying that the woman who fought her way from Oakland to Meridian Group, who turned down my pathetic pickup attempts with such dignity, who has the power to destroy my company but chose mercy instead, that woman is someone I'd like to know better. Even though I'm about to make your professional life very complicated." Connor smiled for the first time since the morning's revelations, and Kimberly felt her heart skip unexpectedly. "Especially because of that. I've spent 5 years surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. Having someone who'll challenge me, who won't let me get away with being less than I should be, that sounds like exactly what I need." Kimberly felt walls she'd spent years building begin to tremble. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected when she'd suggested they leave the corporate tower behind. She'd thought fresh air might help her think clearly about the business relationship they'd just formalized. Instead, she found herself face to face with a man whose story paralleled her own in ways that made her chest tight with recognition. "You realize this complicates everything," she said. "Everything worthwhile is complicated. The power dynamic alone is something we'll figure out together, if you're willing to try." Kimberly looked into Connor's eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Not the entitled hunger from last night, but genuine interest mixed with respect and a vulnerability that matched her own. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted. "Neither do I," Connor said. "But I know I don't want to spend the next 6 months wondering what might have happened if we'd been brave enough to find out." A little girl's balloon escaped her grasp, floating up toward the autumn sky as her parents rushed to console her tears. Kimberly watched the red disappear among the clouds and found herself thinking about chances, the ones you take and the ones you let slip away. "One dinner," she said finally. "One dinner. Somewhere public, nowhere fancy, definitely not anywhere that serves champagne." Kimberly's smile held just a hint of mischief. "You can tell me more about building empires from dorm rooms, and I'll explain how hostile takeovers actually work." Connor felt something light and warm bloom in his chest, hope, he realized, something he hadn't felt about anything beyond business in longer than he cared to remember. "I know a place," he said. "Best pizza in Manhattan, paper plates, absolutely no wine list." "Perfect." Kimberly stood, adjusting her coat as the afternoon shadows lengthened around them. "But Connor." "Yeah. If you ever treat me or any other woman the way you did last night, our business relationship will be the least of your problems. Are we clear?" Connor stood as well, and when he smiled, it transformed his entire face. "Crystal clear. Though I have to say, the woman who negotiated this morning's contract terms is probably more terrifying than any consequence I could imagine." "Smart man." Kimberly extended her hand for a shake. "Partners." Connor took her hand, noting how perfectly it fit in his, how the simple contact sent warmth shooting up his arm. "Partners. In business, at least. And the rest?" "The rest," Connor said, not letting go of her hand, "we'll figure out over pizza." As they walked back toward Fifth Avenue, The saxophone player launched into The Way You Look Tonight, and neither Connor nor Kimberly mentioned how perfectly the music seemed to fit the moment. Some things, they were both learning, were better left unspoken and simply felt. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and vendor hot dogs as Connor walked beside Kimberly down the tree-lined pathway. After 3 hours of contract negotiations, legal signatures, and tense handshakes, she'd surprised him by suggesting they continue their conversation outside the sterile confines of corporate Manhattan. "I needed air," she'd said simply, and something in her voice made Connor cancel his afternoon meetings without hesitation. Now, watching her navigate the weekend crowd with the same controlled grace she displayed in the boardroom, Connor found himself seeing details he'd missed the night before. The way she unconsciously adjusted her burgundy wool coat when strangers stared too long. How her fingers worried the strap of her leather handbag when families passed by, their children's laughter echoing off the bare branches overhead. "You know," Kimberly said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them, "I almost didn't take the meridian position." Connor glanced at her profile, noting the way golden sunlight caught the angles of her face. "Why not? From what I've read, you were perfect for it." "Perfect on paper, maybe." Kimberly paused beside a bench facing the fountain, where the water caught the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. But being perfect on paper and being accepted in the room are two very different things. They settled onto the wooden slats, close enough that Connor caught the subtle scent of her perfume, something warm and sophisticated that seemed to capture her essence perfectly. Around them, Central Park hummed with Saturday energy, joggers in bright athletic wear, couples sharing cotton candy, street musicians filling the air with saxophone melodies. "Tell me about it," Connor said, and something in his tone made Kimberly look at him more carefully. "You really want to know? I'm starting to realize there's a lot I don't know about you." Connor turned to face her fully. "Last night, I saw a beautiful woman at a party and made assumptions. Today, I'm sitting with one of the most successful investment directors on the East Coast. I'd like to understand how we got from there to here." Kimberly was quiet for a long moment, watching a young girl feed pigeons near the fountain while her parents looked on with indulgent smiles. "I grew up in Oakland," she said finally. "My mother was a high school English teacher. My father drove city buses. Good people, hard-working, but they never had enough." Connor nodded, recognizing the familiar weight of economic struggle in her voice. "I was the kid who always had her nose in books," Kimberly continued, a small smile playing at her lips. "While other girls were talking about boys or clothes, I was reading Forbes and Harvard Business Review at the public library. My mother used to joke that I came out of the womb wearing a tiny business suit." "What changed your mind about wanting business success?" Kimberly's expression darkened slightly. "Nothing changed my mind. But I learned early that wanting something and being allowed to have it are completely different things." A jogger passed by, his running shoes slapping rhythmically against the asphalt pathway. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played a haunting rendition of Autumn Leaves, the melody weaving through the afternoon air like smoke. "My senior year of high school," Kimberly said, her voice taking on the careful neutrality she used when discussing painful memories, "I applied for a scholarship to Stanford. Full ride, merit-based, everything I'd worked 4 years to achieve." "Did you get it?" "I got it. And then I almost lost it 3 weeks later." Kimberly's hands tightened on her handbag strap. The scholarship committee received an anonymous complaint suggesting that affirmative action had influenced their decision. That maybe they should reconsider whether I was truly the most qualified candidate. Connor felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What did you do?" "I fought. Tooth and nail, with every document and test score and recommendation letter I could gather. I made them prove that I deserved that scholarship based on merit alone." Kimberly's voice carried quiet steel. "It took 2 months and cost me my senior prom, my graduation party, and probably 10 pounds from stress. But I kept the scholarship. And Stanford was everything I dreamed of and nothing like what I'd expected." Kimberly pulled her coat tighter as a cool breeze rustled the remaining leaves overhead. I was one of 12 black women in my business program. 12, out of nearly 300 students. Connor tried to imagine walking into classes where you could count people who looked like you on 2 hands, where every mistake felt magnified and every success questioned. His own struggles at MIT had been about money and social class, but he'd never had to carry the additional weight of racial isolation. The first semester was brutal, Kimberly continued. Study groups that somehow forgot to invite me. Professors who seemed surprised when I spoke up in class. Classmates who assumed I was there because of quotas rather than qualifications. How did you handle it? Kimberly laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I outworked everyone. While they were networking at fraternity parties, I was in the library until closing. While they relied on family connections for internships, I cold-called companies until someone gave me a chance. I graduated summa cum laude with job offers from 3 Fortune 500 companies. That's incredible. It was necessary. Kimberly turned to look at him directly. You asked me earlier what it would take to rebuild trust. The truth is, Connor, I've spent my entire career learning to read people quickly and accurately. It's a survival skill when you're often the only person who looks like you in important rooms. Connor felt the weight of her words settle over him like lead. And your read on me last night? Last night, you looked at me and saw exactly what I've been fighting against my entire life. A pretty face that didn't belong in your world unless it was there for your entertainment. Kimberly's voice remained steady, but Connor caught the pain underneath. You reduced 15 years of education and achievement to a dress and an opportunity. The saxophone music swelled and faded as the musician moved to a different location. A family walked past, their daughter skipping ahead while clutching a bright red balloon. Normal people living normal lives, unaware of the weight of the conversation happening on the bench beside the fountain. I want to tell you something, Connor said quietly, about why I reacted the way I did. You don't have to. I think I do. Connor leaned forward, his elbows on his knees as he stared at the ground between his feet. I grew up in Detroit. Not the nice parts you see in tourism brochures, the parts they don't show on the news because they're too depressing even for disaster coverage. Kimberly remained silent, sensing that this confession was costing him something significant. My mother was 16 when she had me. Father disappeared before I learned to walk. We lived with my grandmother until I was 8, and then... Connor's voice caught slightly. Grandma couldn't handle raising a kid anymore. Mom was struggling with addiction, in and out of treatment facilities. So I went into the system. Foster care. 7 different homes in 4 years. Connor's laugh was bitter. Some were decent. Others, let's just say I learned early that the world isn't fair, and nobody owes you anything just because you're a kid who needs help. Kimberly felt something shift in her chest as she watched Connor struggle with memories he clearly didn't share often. The arrogant billionaire from last night was gone, replaced by someone who understood what it meant to fight for every opportunity. I aged out of the system at 18 with $200, a GED, and a determination to never be powerless again. Connor finally looked up at her. MIT was my Stanford, a dream that seemed impossible until I made it happen through pure stubbornness and financial aid. How did you go from foster care to MIT? Community college first, then transfer applications until someone took a chance on me. I worked 3 jobs to cover what the scholarships didn't, slept in the library more nights than I care to count, and graduated with honors in computer engineering. Kimberly found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about the man beside her. And Hayes Enterprises? Started in my dorm room senior year with an idea for predictive analytics software. 5 years later, we're about to revolutionize how companies forecast market trends. Connor turned to face her fully. Everything I've built, every success I've achieved, has been about proving that a throwaway kid from Detroit could matter. Then why, Kimberly stopped herself, but Connor understood the unfinished question. Why did I treat you like you didn't matter? Connor was quiet for a long moment, watching pigeons compete for crumbs near their feet. Because somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that having money meant I'd earned the right to take what I wanted. That success had erased the scared kid who used to hide under foster home staircases. The honesty in his voice surprised them both. Around them, Central Park continued its Saturday afternoon rhythm, but the space between Connor and Kimberly had become something separate, more intimate than either had intended. Last night, Connor continued, when you walked into that party wearing that incredible dress, looking like you belonged in a world I'd fought to enter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. What? Intimidation. The admission seemed to cost him. You had this confidence, this natural elegance that I've never been able to fake no matter how much money I make. And instead of respecting that, instead of being impressed by it, I tried to diminish it so I could feel bigger. Kimberly studied his profile as he spoke, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. This wasn't the calculated charm of a businessman trying to save a deal. This was someone genuinely grappling with an ugly truth about himself. You know what's ironic? She said softly. What? I noticed you the moment you walked into that ballroom. Kimberly's admission hung in the air between them like a confession. Before the drinks, before the arrogance, before everything went wrong. I saw you talking to the tech entrepreneurs by the bar, and I thought you looked like someone who understood what it meant to build something from nothing. Connor's head snapped up, surprise clear in his gray eyes. You noticed me? Hard to miss. You had this energy, this passion when you talked about your company. It was. She paused, searching for the right word, attractive, in a way that had nothing to do with money or status. Then why didn't you? Because the moment you approached me, everything changed. Kimberly's voice carried the weight of disappointment. You stopped being the passionate entrepreneur and became just another wealthy man who thought his success entitled him to whatever he wanted. Connor felt something crack open in his chest, a pain that went deeper than professional embarrassment or wounded pride. He destroyed something that might have been beautiful before it ever had a chance to begin. I'm sorry, he said, and the words carried 5 years of loneliness he'd never acknowledged. I'm sorry for seeing you as a conquest instead of a person. I'm sorry for trying to make you small when you're clearly extraordinary. And I'm sorry for wasting what could have been. What could have been what? Connor looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength in her posture, the vulnerability she was allowing him to see despite every reason to keep her walls up. Something real, he said quietly. Something that mattered more than business deals or social status. The saxophone music had started again, closer now, the melody weaving around them like an invitation to honesty. Families continued to pass by, children's laughter mixing with the sound of fountain water and distant traffic. But for Connor and Kimberly, the rest of the world had faded to background noise. Connor, Kimberly said carefully, what are you saying? I'm saying that sitting here with you, learning who you really are, I'm more attracted to you than I was last night when all I could see was how you looked in that dress. Connor's voice was rough with honesty. I'm saying that the woman who fought her way from Oakland to Meridian Group, who turned down my pathetic pickup attempts with such dignity, who has the power to destroy my company but chose mercy instead, that woman is someone I'd like to know better. Even though I'm about to make your professional life very complicated? Connor smiled for the first time since the morning's revelations, and Kimberly felt her heart skip unexpectedly. Especially because of that. I've spent 5 years surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. Having someone who'll challenge me, who won't let me get away with being less than I should be, that sounds like exactly what I need. Kimberly felt walls she'd spent years building begin to tremble. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected when she'd suggested they leave the corporate tower behind. She'd thought fresh air might help her think clearly about the business relationship they just formalized. Instead, She found herself face to face with a man whose story paralleled her own in ways that made her chest tight with recognition. "You realize this complicates everything," she said. "Everything worthwhile is complicated. The power dynamic alone is something we'll figure out together, if you're willing to try." Kimberly looked into Connor's eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Not the entitled hunger from last night, but genuine interest mixed with respect and a vulnerability that matched her own. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she admitted. "Neither do I," Connor said. "But I know I don't want to spend the next 6 months wondering what might have happened if we'd been brave enough to find out." A little girl's balloon escaped her grasp, floating up toward the autumn sky as her parents rushed to console her tears. Kimberly watched the red disappear among the clouds and found herself thinking about chances, the ones you take and the ones you let slip away. "One dinner," she said finally. "One dinner. Somewhere public, nowhere fancy, definitely not anywhere that serves champagne." Kimberly's smile held just a hint of mischief. "You can tell me more about building empires from dorm rooms, and I'll explain how hostile takeovers actually work." Connor felt something light and warm bloom in his chest, hope, he realized, something he hadn't felt about anything beyond business in longer than he cared to remember. "I know a place," he said. "Best pizza in Manhattan, paper plates, absolutely no wine list." "Perfect." Kimberly stood, adjusting her coat as the afternoon shadows lengthened around them. "But Connor." "Yeah. If you ever treat me or any other woman the way you did last night, our business relationship will be the least of your problems. Are we clear?" Connor stood as well, and when he smiled, it transformed his entire face. "Crystal clear. Though I have to say, the woman who negotiated this morning's contract terms is probably more terrifying than any consequence I could imagine." "Smart man." Kimberly extended her hand for a shake. "Partners." Connor took her hand, noting how perfectly it fit in his, how the simple contact sent warmth shooting up his arm. "Partners. In business, at least. And the rest?" "The rest," Connor said, not letting go of her hand, "we'll figure out over pizza." As they walked back toward Fifth Avenue, the saxophone player launched into The Way You Look Tonight, and neither Connor nor Kimberly mentioned how perfectly the music seemed to fit the moment. Some things, they were both learning, were better left unspoken and simply felt. "Are you team second chances, or do you think Connor still has more to prove?" Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing what you think. And if you're invested in seeing where this goes, smash that subscribe button. The small pizzeria buzzed with Saturday evening energy, red checkered tablecloths and vintage photographs of Naples, creating the kind of authentic atmosphere that made tourists feel they discovered a hidden gem. Connor had been right about the pizza. Thin crust perfection emerging from a brick oven that had been feeding Manhattan families for 3 generations. But the easy warmth that had developed between him and Kimberly over the past week felt suddenly fragile as she stared at her phone screen, her face draining of color. "Everything okay?" Connor asked, setting down his slice of margherita pizza. They'd been sharing stories about their worst business meetings, laughing until Kimberly's phone had buzzed with an urgent message. Kimberly's voice trailed off as she read the text again, her dark eyes reflecting a storm of emotions Connor couldn't decipher. "I need to make a call. Excuse me for just a minute." Before Connor could respond, she was weaving through the crowded restaurant toward the street, her burgundy sweater disappearing into the flow of weekend pedestrians visible through the large front windows. Connor watched her pace back and forth on the sidewalk, one hand pressed to her ear while the other gestured animatedly. Even through the glass, he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept running her free hand through her natural curls, a nervous habit he'd noticed during their most intense contract negotiations. When she returned 10 minutes later, her carefully composed professional mask had slipped back into place, replacing the genuine warmth she'd been showing him all evening. "Sorry about that," she said, sliding back into the wooden booth. "Work emergency." "On a Saturday night?" Connor studied her face, noting how she avoided meeting his eyes. Must be serious. It's... Kimberly picked up her water glass, then set it down without drinking. Connor, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Something in her tone made Connor's stomach clench. The easy intimacy they'd been building over shared stories and terrible pizza puns evaporated like steam. Okay. The night of your party, before everything happened between us, did you know who I was? The question hit Connor like a physical blow. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I asked. Kimberly's voice had taken on the cool professionalism she used during hostile negotiations. Did you know I was the Meridian Group representative before you approached me? Connor felt the blood drain from his face. Kimberly, no. Absolutely not. I told you, I had no idea until you walked into that conference room. Because I just got off the phone with my assistant. Kimberly's dark eyes were steady, unforgiving. Apparently, there's been some interesting chatter in certain Manhattan social circles this week. What kind of chatter? The kind that suggests Hayes Enterprises' young CEO has been playing a very sophisticated game. Kimberly leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. According to gossip that's reached 3 different boardrooms, you've been bragging about how you conquered the Meridian deal through unconventional negotiation tactics. Connor felt like he'd been punched in the chest. That's not, who told you that? Does it matter? What matters is that apparently half of Manhattan's financial district thinks you orchestrated our entire relationship as some kind of elaborate business strategy. Kimberly's voice remained level, but Connor could see the hurt bleeding through her professional composure. That you researched me, targeted me at that party, and have been manipulating me ever since. Kimberly, that's insane. You were there, you saw how drunk I was, how completely I messed everything up. If I'd been planning anything, don't you think I would have been a little smoother about it? Unless making yourself look like an ass was part of the strategy. Kimberly's words were surgical in their precision. Nothing makes a woman feel safer than thinking she has the upper hand, right? Let her think she's in control while you play the reformed bad boy angle. Connor stared at her, feeling their entire week together crumble like sand between his fingers. Around them, the restaurant continued its cheerful weekend rhythm. Families sharing meals, couples holding hands across small tables, the easy warmth of people who weren't watching their world collapse in real time. You can't seriously believe that, he said finally. What I believe is that I've spent my entire career learning to recognize when I'm being played. Kimberly's voice carried the weight of every boardroom betrayal, every social slight, every moment she'd been underestimated or manipulated. And the evidence is starting to stack up in ways that make me very uncomfortable. What evidence? Some gossip from people who don't know either of us. The evidence of a man who went from entitled drunk to perfect gentleman in exactly 24 hours. Kimberly's eyes flashed with anger now, the professional mask finally cracking. The evidence of someone who suddenly had all the right words, all the right vulnerabilities, all the right tragic backstory to make me sympathize with him. Connor felt something hot and desperate rise in his throat. My backstory isn't tragic, it's just my life. Everything I told you about Detroit, about foster care, about building the company. I'm not saying you lied about your history. Kimberly cut him off with surgical precision. I'm saying maybe you weaponized it. Maybe you realized that the poor kid from foster care angle would appeal to someone like me, someone who fought her way up from nothing. Someone like you? Connor's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. What's that supposed to mean? Someone naive enough to think that a billionaire CEO might actually be interested in her for reasons that have nothing to do with closing deals. The words hung between them like shattered glass. Connor reached across the table, but Kimberly pulled her hands back before he could touch her. Kimberly, please. Look at me. Connor's voice was raw with desperation. Look at my face and tell me this feels like a performance to you. I've seen you perform, Connor. You're very good at it. Kimberly stood abruptly, reaching for her purse. The night we met, you performed entitled privilege. This week, you've been performing vulnerability and growth. How do I know which one is real? Because you know me. Connor stood as well, his voice carrying enough emotion to make several diners turn their heads. You've spent hours with me. You've seen me when I didn't know you were watching. I've seen what you wanted me to see. Kimberly's voice broke slightly on the last word, revealing the pain she'd been trying to hide behind anger. And God, I was so desperate to believe it was real that I ignored every red flag. What red flags? The perfect timing. The way you always seem to know exactly what to say. The fact that a man who could have any woman in Manhattan suddenly became fixated on the one person who could make or break his biggest deal. Kimberly slung her purse over her shoulder with shaking hands. I mean, what are the odds? Connor felt his own anger beginning to rise, hot and defensive. So what, you think I'm some kind of master manipulator? You think I orchestrated getting drunk and humiliating myself in front of half of Manhattan's elite? I think you're a brilliant businessman who saw an opportunity and took it. Kimberly's voice was steady again, professionally cold. And I think I was stupid enough to confuse business acumen with genuine feeling. That's not, Connor stopped himself, recognizing the futility of arguing with someone who had already made up her mind. Fine. You want to believe I'm some kind of sociopathic mastermind? Go ahead. But answer me this. What possible benefit would I get from continuing this charade now that the deal is signed? Maybe you're thinking long-term. Meridian Group handles investment portfolios worth billions. Having someone on the inside who trusts you completely? That's worth more than one software contract. The accusation hit Connor like a slap. Everything they'd shared, the vulnerability in Central Park, the easy laughter over terrible pizza, the way she'd looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, reduced to calculated business strategy. You really think that little of me, he said quietly. I think exactly as much of you as the evidence supports. Kimberly's professional mask was fully in place now, transforming her back into the composed executive who'd walked into his conference room a week ago. Which, apparently, isn't very much at all. Connor felt something break inside his chest. Not the clean snap of sudden heartbreak, but the slow, grinding destruction of something precious being crushed under the weight of mistrust. Kimberly, I don't. She held up one hand, stopping his words before they could form. Just don't. I've heard enough carefully crafted explanations for one lifetime. So that's it? You're just going to walk away because some gossips in Manhattan think they know my business. I'm going to walk away because I refuse to be another woman who confused business manipulation with romance. Kimberly's voice carried the weight of every woman who'd ever been played by someone with more power and fewer scruples. I'm going to walk away because I'd rather be alone than be someone's mark. And what about us? What about everything we've shared this week? Kimberly paused at the edge of their table, her dark eyes meeting his for what felt like the last time. What about it? A few nice conversations over coffee? Some shared stories that may or may not have been true. Connor, we barely know each other. That's not true, and you know it. What I know is that I've been professionally involved with Hayes Enterprises for exactly 8 days. Kimberly's voice was carefully controlled, but Connor caught the slight tremor that betrayed her emotion. What I know is that I let my guard down with someone I should have kept at arm's length. What I know is that mixing business with personal feelings was a mistake I won't be making again. Connor watched her walk toward the restaurant's exit, her burgundy sweater weaving through tables full of people who had no idea they'd just witnessed something beautiful die before it ever had a chance to truly live. He stood frozen beside their table, half-eaten pizza growing cold, watching through the window as Kimberly disappeared into the Manhattan crowd. Part of him wanted to chase after her, to force her to listen, to somehow find the words that would make her believe him. But a larger part, the part that had learned early not to beg for things that weren't freely given, simply stood there and let her go. Everything okay, sir? The waitress appeared at his elbow, her concerned expression suggesting his emotional turmoil was more visible than he'd realized. Yeah, Connor said, his voice hoarse. Just, yeah. Can I get the check? As he waited for the bill, Connor's phone buzzed with a text from his publicist. Need to talk ASAP. Some concerning rumors circulating about your personal life. Damage control meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Connor stared at the message, pieces of a puzzle beginning to form a picture he didn't like. Someone had been spreading rumors about him and Kimberly, painting their developing relationship as calculated business strategy. But who? And why? More importantly, how was he going to prove to Kimberly that everything between them had been real when she was no longer willing to listen? The waitress returned with his check, and Connor left a $40 tip on a $25 meal, his mind already racing through possibilities. Someone wanted to destroy whatever was building between him and Kimberly. Someone with access to Manhattan's financial gossip network and reasons to see either him or Meridian Group fail. As he stepped out into the cool November evening, Connor made a decision. If Kimberly thought he was capable of elaborate manipulation, then maybe it was time to prove just how resourceful he could be when someone, really mattered to him. But first, he needed to find out who was pulling the strings behind the rumors that had just cost him the first woman he'd cared about in years. The game, it seemed, was just beginning. The gray pre-dawn light filtering through Connor's office windows matched his mood perfectly as he sat surrounded by printouts, his laptop screen glowing with financial records and communication logs. He'd been here since 4 a.m., fueled by black coffee and the kind of desperate determination that came from having nothing left to lose. His phone buzzed for the 15th time in 2 hours, another message from his publicist, his brother Kevin, his assistant. Everyone wanted answers he didn't have. Everyone except the one person whose opinion actually mattered. Connor rubbed his bloodshot eyes and stared at the evidence he'd compiled through 6 hours of methodical investigation. Phone records showing unusual communication patterns between his competitor, Roland Digital Solutions, and 3 prominent Manhattan gossip columnists. Financial transfers that coincided perfectly with the timing of the rumors about him and Kimberly. Most damning of all, email fragments recovered from his own company's servers showing that someone had been monitoring his calendar and movements for weeks. The pieces painted a clear picture. He was being systematically destroyed by someone who understood exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Sir. His assistant knocked softly on the glass door. Your 9 a.m. with the publicity team is here. Connor looked up from his research, his white dress shirt wrinkled from the all-nighter, his usually perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it. Cancel it. Sir. Cancel everything today. I need. Connor paused, staring at a particular email thread that made his stomach clench. I need to make some calls. What should I tell the publicity team? Tell them the truth, that I'm more interested in fixing the actual problem than managing the perception of it. His assistant nodded and retreated, leaving Connor alone with the weight of his discovery. The evidence was solid, actionable, enough to clear his name and expose the manipulation. But sitting here in his glass tower, surrounded by the trappings of power and success, Connor realized that proving his innocence wasn't enough. Kimberly was gone. She'd looked at him with such disappointment, such carefully concealed hurt, that he could still feel the impact like a physical blow. Even if he could prove someone else had orchestrated the rumors, would it matter? She'd made her choice based on what she believed about him, about the kind of man she thought he was. Connor's phone rang, interrupting his brooding. Kevin's name flashed on the screen. You sound like hell, his brother said without preamble. I feel worse. Connor leaned back in his leather chair, watching the city wake up 30 floors below. Someone's been playing chess with my life, and I didn't even realize I was on the board. The rumors about you and the Meridian woman? Her name is Kimberly. The correction came out sharper than Connor intended. And yes, someone fed gossip columnists a story about me manipulating her for business advantage. Perfectly timed to destroy any trust between us. But you've got proof it's false. Connor gestured at his desk full of evidence, even though Kevin couldn't see him. Enough to prove conspiracy, corporate sabotage, maybe even extortion. Roland Digital has been systematically trying to destroy me since they lost the Meridian bid. So clear your name. Sue them into oblivion. Problem solved. It's not that simple. Connor stood and walked to his windows, looking out at Central Park in the distance. Somewhere in this city, Kimberly was probably getting ready for another day of being brilliant and professional and completely convinced that he was a manipulative bastard. Even if I prove the rumors were planted, even if I expose everything, she still chose not to trust me. She chose to believe the worst possible interpretation of my actions. Maybe because she's been hurt before? Connor thought about the pain he'd glimpsed in Kimberly's eyes when she'd accused him of weaponizing his vulnerability. The way she'd said someone naive enough to think that a billionaire CEO might actually be interested in her, like she'd been telling herself that story for years. Probably, he admitted. But knowing why she doesn't trust me doesn't change the fact that she doesn't. So what are you going to do? Connor closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. He could take the evidence to his lawyers, destroy Roland Digital, clear his name in Manhattan's business circles. He could move on, find someone else, pretend that Kimberly had never challenged everything he thought he knew about himself. Or he could do something that terrified him more than any hostile takeover or board meeting. He could choose to be vulnerable without any guarantee of protection. I'm going to prove to her that some things matter more than winning, Connor said quietly. How? By giving up the things she thinks I want most. Sunday, 10:45 a.m. Meridian Group offices, Midtown Manhattan. Kimberly sat in her office reviewing quarterly reports, trying to focus on anything other than the hollow ache in her chest that had settled there since walking away from Connor the night before. The numbers on her computer screen blurred together as her mind replayed their conversation, searching for signs she'd missed, clues that might have revealed his true intentions earlier. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Saw the gossip column this morning. You okay? Kimberly didn't bother reading whatever salacious nonsense had made it into print. She'd learned years ago that being a successful black woman in finance meant accepting that people would always have opinions about her choices, her relationships, her right to occupy spaces they thought belonged to someone else. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Her assistant peeked around the doorframe, looking unusually flustered. Ms. Washington? Connor Hayes is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Kimberly's pulse spiked before she could control it. Tell him I'm busy. He said to give you this. Her assistant held out an envelope with her name written in Connor's precise handwriting. Against her better judgment, Kimberly took the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 lines written in the same careful script. I know you don't trust me anymore. I know you think everything between us was calculated. But would a manipulator give up $1 billion empire to prove you wrong? Kimberly stared at the note, her heart hammering against her ribs. Send him in. Connor appeared in her doorway moments later, looking like he'd slept in his clothes. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his white button-down wrinkled, his dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. Thank you for seeing me, he said, stepping into her office but remaining near the door, as if he understood that he no longer had the right to assume welcome. What do you mean, give up $1 billion empire? Kimberly's voice was carefully controlled, professional. Connor pulled out his phone and set it on her desk. Before we talk, I need you to listen to something. He pressed play on a voice recording. A man's voice, crisp and professional, filled the room. The timing has to be perfect. We plant the manipulation story right after they start getting close, but before Hayes realizes what's happening. Make it look like he's been playing her from the beginning. Kimberly felt her stomach drop as the recording continued, detailing a systematic campaign to destroy Connor's reputation and, specifically, any relationship he might develop with her. The voice belonged to Marcus Rowland, CEO of Rowland Digital Solutions, Hayes Enterprises' biggest competitor. "How did you get this?" she asked when the recording ended. 6 hours of investigation and some help from a private security firm. Connor's green eyes were steady, honest. "Rowland's been monitoring my communications, tracking my movements, looking for leverage ever since they lost the Meridian contract. When their sources told them I was getting close to someone from your company, they saw an opportunity." Kimberly stared at the phone, pieces falling into place. "The rumors about us. All fabricated. The gossip columnists, the social media whispers, even some of the sources who claimed to have heard me bragging, all paid for by Rowland Digital." Connor's voice carried no satisfaction at being vindicated, only exhaustion. "I can prove all of it. I have financial records, communication logs, everything you'd need to see them prosecuted for corporate sabotage. Why are you showing me this instead of taking it to the authorities?" Connor was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond her shoulder. "Because proving I was set up doesn't prove that what I feel for you is real. It doesn't change the fact that you looked at me last night and chose to believe I was capable of manipulating you." "Connor." "No, let me finish." He finally met her eyes, and Kimberly was startled by the raw emotion she saw there. "You were right about one thing. I am a master manipulator when it comes to business. I've spent my entire adult life learning how to read people, how to find leverage, how to win at any cost. And maybe that's why you couldn't trust that what's happening between us is different." Kimberly felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm walking away from the Hayes Meridian contract." The words hit Kimberly like a physical blow. "What?" Connor pulled a legal document from his jacket and placed it on her desk next to his phone. "Formal notice of contract termination. Effective immediately. Hayes Enterprises is withdrawing from all current and future business relationships with Meridian Group." Kimberly stared at the document, her mind reeling. "Connor, that's insane. This deal is worth everything to my company, I know." Connor's smile was sad, resigned. "It would make Hayes Enterprises the dominant player in enterprise software. It would secure our position for the next decade. It would probably double our valuation within 2 years." "Then why?" "Because I need you to know that you matter more to me than any deal, any amount of money, any business advantage." Connor's voice broke slightly. "Because I need you to understand that a manipulator wouldn't give up everything he's worked for just to prove a point." Kimberly felt tears burning behind her eyes. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious. My lawyers think I've lost my mind, my board will probably try to have me committed, and my investors are going to lose millions. But I'd rather lose everything I've built than have you spend one more day thinking that you were just a means to an end." "Connor, this is—" Kimberly stood abruptly, pacing to her window. "This is the stupidest, most reckless thing I've ever heard." "Probably. You're destroying your company for someone you've known for 8 days. Yes. Someone who accused you of being a sociopathic mastermind less than 24 hours ago. Also yes." Kimberly turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks despite her efforts to maintain composure. "Why?" Connor stood as well, his green eyes intense, vulnerable. "Because 8 days with you taught me more about who I want to be than 30 years of building an empire. Because when you smile at something I've said, I feel like I could conquer the world. Because when you're angry at me, I'd rather fix whatever I broke than win the argument." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Because I'm falling in love with you, Kimberly. Not with what you can do for my business, not with the deal you represent, but with the woman who calls me out when I'm being an ass, who makes terrible jokes about contract law, who looks at the world like it's full of possibilities instead of just obstacles to overcome." Kimberly felt her last defenses crumbling. "Connor, I know you don't trust me yet. I know you think 8 days isn't enough time to know someone well enough to love them. Maybe you're right. But I also know that I'd rather spend the rest of my life proving to you that this is real than spend another day pretending that business success matters more than finding someone who makes me want to be better than I was yesterday. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything they'd shared and everything they'd almost lost. Through her office windows, Kimberly could see Manhattan bustling with its usual Sunday energy, people walking dogs, street vendors setting up, the endless rhythm of a city that never stopped moving. You realize, she said finally, that if I take you back, it'll look exactly like what Roland Digital was trying to make people believe? That I used my influence to benefit someone I'm personally involved with. Connor's smile was genuine for the first time since he'd walked into her office. Let them talk. I'll be too busy being the luckiest man in Manhattan to care what anyone else thinks. And your company? We'll rebuild. Maybe stronger this time, with someone at my side who won't let me forget that success without integrity isn't really success at all. Kimberly looked at the contract termination on her desk, then at the man who just offered to sacrifice everything he'd worked for to prove his feelings were real. It was insane, romantic, completely irresponsible, and absolutely convinced her that no one capable of such calculated manipulation would ever be willing to lose so much for so little guarantee of return. You know, she said, walking slowly toward him, there might be another way to handle this. I'm listening. What if, instead of terminating our contract, Hayes Enterprises agreed to work exclusively with a new Meridian Group account manager? Someone with no personal involvement in the deal. Connor's eyes widened as he understood her implication. You'd recuse yourself? I'd transfer to our London office. Take over European expansion. Let someone else handle Hayes Enterprises. Kimberly stopped just close enough to touch him, her dark eyes searching his face. That way, your company gets the deal it needs, my company maintains its biggest client, and we get to find out what happens between us without any business complications. Kimberly, you can't give up your position here for what? For the chance to build something real with someone who just proved he values me more than money. She reached up and smoothed his disheveled hair. Connor, I've been waiting my entire life for someone to choose me over everything else. Not because I'm useful, not because I'm convenient, but just because I'm me. So what does this mean? It means, Kimberly said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him softly, that you're an idiot who just tried to blow up a billion-dollar deal for a woman who was already falling for you. Connor's arms came around her waist, pulling her closer. So you forgive me for being an entitled drunk who ruined your dress. I forgive you for being human. Kimberly smiled against his lips. But you're buying me a new dress. That one was expensive. I'll buy you a whole wardrobe. Just one dress, Connor. I'm not your charity case. No, he agreed, his green eyes soft with a kind of tenderness that made her believe in fairy tales. You're the woman who's about to teach a former foster kid from Detroit what it means to have a real home. As they kissed in her sun-drenched office, 30 floors above the Manhattan streets where they'd first collided, neither of them noticed the contract termination papers scattered across her desk, pages that would never be filed, terms that would never be executed, because sometimes the most powerful choice isn't walking away. Sometimes it's choosing to stay and fight for what matters most. 3 weeks had transformed everything and nothing at all. Connor stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Rainbow Room, watching the twinkling lights of Manhattan stretch endlessly in every direction, the Chrysler Building gleaming like a Art Deco jewel against the winter sky. Tonight, the venue that had hosted countless celebrations for Manhattan's elite would witness something far more precious than another corporate merger or society wedding. He adjusted his charcoal gray suit jacket nervously, the same shade he'd worn the night they first met, though this time his bow tie was perfectly straight and his hands were steady. His reflection in the window showed a man transformed, the arrogant edge softened into confident warmth, the calculating gleam replaced by something far more genuine. You look like you're about to jump, Kevin observed, approaching with 2 crystal flutes of champagne. His navy blue suit complemented Connor's perfectly, a detail their mother would have appreciated. having second thoughts. About tonight? Never. Connor accepted the champagne but didn't drink. About the last 3 weeks? Also never. The transformation had been swift and decisive. Kimberly's transfer to the London office had been expedited through Meridian's European Expansion Initiative, positioning her as Director of International Development, a promotion that came with a corner office overlooking the Thames and responsibilities that spanned 3 continents. Meanwhile, Hayes Enterprises had rebuilt their partnership with Meridian under the supervision of Thomas Chun, a brilliant strategist who'd proven surprisingly effective at managing Connor's occasionally impulsive business instincts. The Roland Digital situation? Kevin asked. Settled yesterday. Civil suit concluded, criminal charges pending, and their stock price is somewhere in the basement. Connor's smile held no malice, only satisfaction at justice served. Turns out corporate espionage leaves quite a paper trail when you dig deep enough. And Hayes Enterprises? Stronger than ever. Funny how focusing on actual innovation instead of political maneuvering tends to improve business outcomes. Connor glanced at his watch. 7:35 p.m. The Meridian Partnership officially launched our enterprise platform in 12 European markets last week. We're projecting 200% growth in international revenue by next quarter. All without any personal conflicts of interest, Kevin noted approvingly. All completely above board and transparent. Connor's expression grew soft. Though I suspect Thomas Chun thinks I'm insane for flying to London every weekend for the past month. Are you insane? Connor considered the question seriously. For weeks ago, he would have called any businessman who prioritized personal relationships over professional advancement mentally unstable. Now, standing here in his tailored suit with his heart hammering against his ribs, he understood that some kinds of insanity were actually the deepest form of clarity. Probably, he admitted, but it's the best kind of crazy I've ever experienced. The elevator chimed softly across the room, and Connor's breath caught as the doors opened. Kimberly stepped out, and for a moment, the entire glittering city beyond the windows dimmed in comparison. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown that hugged her curves perfectly, the deep neckline elegant rather than revealing, the flowing skirt catching the light as she moved. Her hair was swept into an intricate updo that showcased the graceful line of her neck, small diamond earrings catching the ambient glow from the room's crystal chandeliers. But it was her smile, warm, genuine, radiating pure joy, that made Connor's heart skip several beats. "Breathe," Kevin murmured. "You're going to pass out before you get to the good part." Connor barely heard him. Kimberly was walking toward them with that confident grace he'd first noticed in the Meridian conference room, her dark eyes sparkling with happiness and something that looked suspiciously like mischief. "Sorry I'm late," she said, accepting the kiss Connor pressed to her cheek. "My flight from Heathrow was delayed, and then I had to convince my hotel that yes, I really did need my room ready 3 hours early for a very important date." "Worth the wait," Connor said, meaning every word. "How was the Amsterdam presentation?" "Brilliant. The Dutch Meridian subsidiary wants to expand our partnership into renewable energy software solutions. Something about Hayes Enterprises' reputation for innovation and ethical business practices." Her smile turned teasing. "Apparently, word has gotten around that you're one of the good ones now." "I had an excellent teacher." "Ms. Washington," Kevin interrupted smoothly, "you look absolutely stunning." Connor's been pacing this room like a caged panther for the last hour. "Only an hour?" Kimberly raised an eyebrow at Connor. "You're losing your edge. Last month you started pacing at noon for an 8 o'clock dinner." "That was different. That was our first official date after you moved to London." Connor took her hand, marveling as always at how perfectly her fingers fit between his. "Tonight is special," she finished, squeezing his hand gently. "I know. Your assistant sent me approximately 17 emails about dress codes, timing, and weather contingencies. Very thorough. I wanted everything to be perfect." Connor. Kimberly's voice was gentle, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. You do realize that I fell for you when you were drunk, belligerent, and wearing a wine-stained shirt, right? The perfection is nice, but it's not why I'm here. Connor felt some of his nervous tension ease. 3 weeks of daily phone calls, weekend visits, and constant text messages had only deepened what they'd started in those 8 chaotic days in November. Distance had proved what proximity had suggested, that whatever they'd found together was strong enough to survive separation, time zones, and the skepticism of everyone around them. Speaking of why you're here, Connor said, glancing meaningfully at Kevin. His brother took the hint with good grace. I'm going to check on the final preparations. Kimberly, it really is wonderful to see you again. You too, Kevin. Thank you for keeping this one sane while I've been across the Atlantic. My pleasure. Though I should warn you, he's been insufferable to live with. Last week he rearranged his entire schedule around your phone calls. Kevin, Connor warned. And he's installed a world clock in his office, so he always knows what time it is in London. Okay, that's enough. And yesterday I caught him looking at real estate listings in Kensington. Kevin. His brother retreated with a grin, leaving Connor and Kimberly alone at the windows overlooking the city. Below them, Rockefeller Center's famous Christmas tree towered 60 feet into the air, its thousands of lights creating a beacon of warmth against the December cold. Real estate in Kensington? Kimberly asked, amusement dancing in her voice. Research, Connor said quickly. Market analysis. Competitive intelligence. Aha. She moved closer, until her shoulder brushed his arm. And what did this market analysis conclude? That London real estate is ridiculously expensive, but there's a particular flat in South Kensington with a view of Hyde Park that would be perfect for someone who needs to commute easily between the financial district and Heathrow Airport. Kimberly was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city lights. Connor, we agreed to take this slow. 3 weeks of weekend visits and daily phone calls is hardly. I know. Connor turned to face her fully, his green eyes serious. And I'm not suggesting we rush anything. But I also can't pretend that spending 5 days a week missing you feels sustainable long-term. So what are you suggesting? Instead of answering immediately, Connor reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Kimberly's eyes widened, her breath catching audibly. Before you panic, he said quickly, this isn't what you think it is. Well, it is and it isn't. He opened the box to reveal not an engagement ring, but a delicate key crafted from white gold, hanging from a platinum chain. It's the key to that flat in South Kensington. Kimberly stared at the necklace, then at Connor, her expression unreadable. You bought a flat in London. I bought a flat in London, he confirmed. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, study with built-in bookshelves, kitchen that's probably wasted on someone who considers cereal a food group. There's a balcony overlooking the park, and the building has excellent security. Connor. I'm not asking you to move in with me, he continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. I'm asking you to let me move closer to you. Hayes Enterprises is opening a London office, something we've been considering for years anyway. I'd be director of European operations, which means I'd travel back to New York maybe once a month instead of you flying here every weekend. Kimberly lifted the necklace from the box, the key catching the light from the chandeliers above. You're moving to London. For me. I'm moving to London for us. Connor's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. Because 3 weeks of missing you has taught me that I don't want to build an empire if you're not there to share it with. Because I wake up every morning wondering what you're having for breakfast and go to sleep every night wishing I could kiss you goodnight in person. And if this doesn't work out? If we're rushing things and it all falls apart? Connor was quiet for a long moment, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. Then I'll have spent whatever time we do have together being completely, irrationally happy. And I'll have a very nice flat in one of the world's greatest cities. That's a very expensive backup plan. I've made worse investments. Connor's smile was gentle, self-deprecating. Besides, I'm pretty confident in this particular venture. The market research was very thorough. Kimberly laughed despite herself, the sound bright and warm in the glittering room. Market research. Extensive analysis of the subject's preferences, habits, and long-term goals. The data strongly suggests that she's worth any level of investment risk. And what does the data say about her feelings on grand romantic gestures? Mixed results, Connor admitted. She seems to appreciate them in principle, but gets nervous when they involve major life changes or expensive real estate purchases. Smart woman. Brilliant woman. Which is why I'm hoping she'll see that this isn't really a grand gesture, it's a practical solution to a logistical problem. Kimberly turned the key over in her palm, studying its intricate design. You had this custom made. The building gave me a standard key, but it seemed like something this important deserved to be more special. Connor's voice grew uncertain. Unless you think it's too much? I can return the flat, find something smaller, maybe just get a hotel. Connor. Kimberly looked up at him, her dark eyes bright with unshed tears. Will you help me put this on? Connor's hands shook slightly as he took the necklace and moved behind her, lifting the chain over her head and securing the clasp at the nape of her neck. The key settled perfectly at the hollow of her throat, the white gold warm against her brown skin. How does it look? She asked, turning back to face him. Like it belongs there, Connor said honestly. Like you were meant to wear it. Kimberly reached up and touched the key gently, then stepped closer until she was standing in the circle of his arms. You know this is crazy, right? People don't relocate internationally after 3 weeks of dating. People don't fall in love in 8 days either, Connor pointed out. But here we are. Here we are, she agreed softly. Though technically, it's been almost 4 weeks now. You're right. We're practically old married couple at this point. Kimberly laughed, the sound bubbling up from someplace deep and joyful. Is that what we are? We're whatever you want us to be, Connor said, his voice growing serious again. But I hope we're something that includes me waking up in the same time zone as you more often than not. I think, Kimberly said slowly, that we're something worth taking a chance on. Connor felt his heart expand until it seemed too large for his chest. Yeah. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed him softly, her lips warm and sure against his. But I have conditions. Name them. First, we split the mortgage payments. I'm not your kept woman, and I won't let you support me. Deal. Though technically it's a cash purchase, so. Connor. Right. We'll figure out the financial details later. What else? Second, you let me redecorate. That flat better not look like a minimalist magazine spread when I get there. It's completely unfurnished. You can decorate however you want. Third, Kimberly's voice grew softer, more vulnerable. You promise me that this isn't some elaborate way of managing a long-distance relationship until you get bored. That you're not going to wake up in 6 months and realize you've rearranged your entire life for someone you barely know. Connor cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. Kimberly, I know you better after 3 weeks than I knew myself after 30 years. I know that you take your coffee with exactly 2 sugars and no cream, that you read mystery novels when you're stressed, that you hum jazz standards when you think no one is listening. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle and reverent. I know that you cry during animal documentaries, that you're secretly terrified of butterflies, that you donate anonymously to literacy programs in Detroit every Christmas. I know that you're the strongest person I've ever met, that you make me want to be better than I ever thought possible, and that I'd rather spend 1 day with you than a lifetime with anyone else. How do you know about the butterfly thing? Kimberly asked, her voice watery with emotion. You mentioned it during one of our Tuesday night phone calls. We were talking about phobias, and you said you know it's irrational, but something about the way they move freaks you out. You remember that? I remember everything you tell me, Connor said simply. Because everything about you matters to me. Kimberly was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the soft light from the city below. You know what I think? What? I think you're still the same man who was arrogant enough to approach a stranger at a party and confident enough to think she'd be interested. Connor winced. Is that a bad thing? No, Kimberly smiled, her expression warm and slightly wicked. I think it's exactly the kind of confidence it takes to relocate to another country for love. The good kind of arrogant. There's a good kind. The kind that makes you believe you deserve something wonderful, even when you're not sure you've earned it yet. She kissed him again, deeper this time, her arms winding around his neck. The kind that makes you fight for what matters. As they stood together in the Rainbow Room, surrounded by the glittering lights of Manhattan and the promise of London mornings, Connor thought about the journey that had brought them here. 8 days of collision and connection, 3 weeks of separation and discovery, and now this moment of choosing to build something together despite every logical reason to proceed with caution. So what happens next? He asked against her lips. Next, you take me to dinner at that ridiculously expensive restaurant you've undoubtedly reserved for tonight. Lou Bernardine. 8:30 reservation. Of course it is. Kimberly shook her head in amused exasperation. Then tomorrow, you start packing for London. And then we see what happens when two people who are crazy about each other actually get to be in the same place long enough to figure out if crazy is the same thing as compatible. Connor spun her around suddenly, her velvet skirt flaring out as she laughed with surprise and delight. When he set her down, her cheeks were flushed and her carefully arranged hair was slightly mussed, and she'd never looked more beautiful. I love you, he said, the words coming out without calculation or strategy, just simple truth. I know it's too soon and too fast and too much, but I love you, Kimberly Washington. I love you too, she replied, her voice steady and sure. Connor Hayes, foster kid from Detroit who built an empire and then chose to risk it all for love. I love your ridiculous confidence and your terrible wine selection and the way you remember every random thing I tell you during our phone calls. Even the butterfly phobia. Especially the butterfly phobia. Kimberly reached up and straightened his bow tie, her touch gentle and possessive. And I love that you're brave enough to move across an ocean for something that might not work out. It's going to work out, Connor said with quiet certainty. How can you be so sure? Connor thought about the question, about all the careful market analysis and risk assessment that had guided his business decisions for the past decade. Then he thought about the way Kimberly's smile made him feel like he could accomplish anything, the way their conversations flowed like they'd been talking to each other for years, the way she challenged him to be better while accepting exactly who he was. Because, he said finally, for the first time in my life, I'm investing in something that actually matters. And the returns on that kind of investment. He kissed her once more, soft and lingering. They're infinite. 3 months later, the financial press would report that Hayes Enterprises' London expansion had exceeded all projections, establishing the company as a major player in European markets. What they wouldn't report was that Connor Hayes had found something more valuable than market dominance. He'd found home in the laughter of a brilliant woman who took her morning coffee with exactly 2 sugars and hummed Ella Fitzgerald while reading the international business section. And if you happened to walk past a certain South Kensington flat on any given evening, you might catch a glimpse through the windows of 2 people slow dancing in their kitchen, surrounded by mismatched furniture and the kind of happiness that money can't buy but love creates effortlessly. The wine stain from that November night had long since been dry cleaned away, but the memory remained. Not as a moment of humiliation, but as the beautiful beginning of everything that mattered most. And there you have it, beautiful souls. From wine-soaked disaster to London love story, are you sobbing happy tears right now? Because I am. What did you think about Connor literally moving countries for love? Drop a comment below and tell me, Would you cross an ocean for the right person? Don't forget to smash that subscribe button if this story gave you all the feels, and share this with someone who believes in second chances and epic love stories. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.